you mentioned the rising deficits and debts crowding out private investment. I mean, economists, not all economists, but many economists have been complaining for years about the dangers to the economy of rising deficits and debt. And yet, here we are at levels of debt that many people thought, inconceivable a decade ago. And yet none of the awful, terrible things that have been discussed have come to pass. I mean, are we just lucky we've dodged the bullet? Or, what's sort of the explanation of why things aren't perhaps worse than they are or they appear to be?
Well, this is the conundrum for us at the Peterson Foundation, where we've been concerned about this, as have you all at the Concord Coalition for a long time. And the Armageddon hasn't come to pass, thankfully. I think some of it may be just a comparison, like bringing our debt to GDP level up to 100% isn't great, but we still may be a better option than securities that you get from other places, other countries, other regions, and so on. So maybe again, we look there in comparison. It also does seem like there's a really large pool of money that needs a place to go. If the U.S. is still considered safe, which I believe it is, then you can be confident that investing in Treasury security will get you back your principal and some interest as well. So I think that those are factors. That term premium, I think, had come down quite a bit with all the, after the Great Recession, during the pandemic, given other things that are going on in the world. CBO has it coming back up temporarily and then kind of receding, and then sort of dropping a little bit again. So I think, there's still, Treasury securities could still be attractive at low interest rates. But what's not clear is where that tipping point is. So again, when we all first got started, we probably thought 100% was above the tipping point, or maybe at it. It's a nice round number, but we're about there right now. That's GDP, and there's no indication that any tipping is about to happen. So yeah, but is it 120% of GDP? Is it is it what happens when we exceed the previous high, of 109% or so? So that's slated to happen in CBO's projections in 2028. Is it something much higher? We don't know. And when the tipping happens, it could happen quite quickly. And that's the risk that we don't really want to take.
It's the old saying that everything's great until it isn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we won't have too far to find out if we want to test those limits. I mean, not limits, but I mean, it's, you mentioned 120% of GDP. Well, we'll get that in about 10 years by the end of this baseline, and close to 200% within 30 years. So it's if I were 30 instead of the age I am, that could be a little bit problematic. I mean, it's got to have some negative effect on long-term growth, and certainly on, the effect that the budget would have, certainly with revenues and squeezing out other programs.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. There is a sort of generational unfairness, it feels like, behind all of this. The current generation was able to borrow, current generation or past, sort of future ones have been able to borrow sort of at will, but it limits the choices of those further into the future. Not just for the federal budget, but as you said, maybe it has some slowdown effect on the economy. CBO assumes that rising debt to GDP ratios mean interest rates will creep up. That has effect for people who want to borrow for a mortgage or a car or something like that. Yeah, so it feels like there is some generational inequity there too that would benefit from some addressing of the trajectory of the deficit and the debt.